Okay. Nice different rhythm and pitch and mix, right? Okay, so now for our theme. Back in the main sanctuary, once in a while I wander in, see what's happening there. And behind the bima on the side where the choir and the organ used to stand many, many ages ago, is now I have to say, a dump of books. Somebody unloaded piles of books. And I look inside and I peek in once in a while. And they're somebody's library, and it's an academic library. Usually something that somebody who was a Jewish professional would have. So I flip through, and apropos of my theme, I find these little pamphlets sitting in there. They're reprints of pamphlets going back 200 years and more to the founding of the United States of America and the beginnings of the Jewish community in America. So I look and I say, here, for example, by Gershon Sextus. Gershon Sextus is one of the key figures when the community is unsure of what's happening for Jews in the New World, and he writes to Washington, and I'll talk about that later, and he gets this great letter from Washington assuring of the openness of America. So this is his sermon, 1798. Then I see another one here, sermon for Shavuot, Rabbi Chaim Isaac Karigal from the city of Hebron, who come to settle in the New World. By a reminder, Hebron was a Jewishly inhabited city over the centuries. 1773, there was not yet a United States. So, Right. So I don't know who did this. I don't see it in Mark. Sometimes when they do these reprints, they say who was the company. I didn't see that. Yeah. So I don't know who did the reprinting, but it's done up to look as it might have looked originally. This one, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services, and the date, New York, and the TCLXI, which I think is LXI, 1761 would be, I think so. 1761. This one, 1807, Hebrew Orphan Society. It was very interesting. So that takes me into my topic. Get rid of the garbage here in front of us. Bear with me. And I'm going to head on down to where I wanted to pick up. So I talked a little bit about the first Jews settling in what was New Amsterdam, later has become New York. And Jews begrudgingly were allowed admission into these early colonies. And they fought for their rights in the New York colony, which was originally the Dutch colony, later the New York colony. They obtained permission to bury their dead in a synagogue, in a Jewish cemetery, and the right to trade on the Hudson and Delaware rivers. And this thing of, just being able to make a living, they had to fight for that, right? And they did. And then they petitioned for equal rights with other citizens of the colony. There we go, right? We're paying taxes. And if that's the case, we also want to serve in the militia, the right to be in the military. And the people who led this, Jacob Bar Simpson, Asher Levy, and they won their case and gained more rights. And then, as I said, the British took over, and British rule improved conditions for the Jewish community. Population in these colonies grew from, in the New York area, from 23 to 300 a decade later. By 1700, there was a synagogue on Beacon Street. By 1730, She'erit Israel, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue as it is known today. So the heirs to that synagogue still operate a synagogue there. Jewish settlements then spreading throughout the colonies and later the states. Newport, Rhode Island, there were 1,200 Jews. That was half of all American Jewry at that time. The establishment of the Touro Synagogue, the oldest standing synagogue in the country. And here is a picture of it from the balcony down below. And downstairs, we have the Touro University. One of the branches is here in our building. and the founders of the university intentionally took the name of Turo in honor of Jacob, Judah, and Isaac Turo, the philanthropists who prayed for that original synagogue in Rhode Island, and later the Turo Synagogue in New Orleans, which is still in existence today. All right, and if you want, you can go on a virtual tour, turosynagogue.org, you can see it. Well, then also Philadelphia. Jews settled in Philadelphia before 1682, spread south to the Carolinas and Georgia. By 1776, 3,000 Jews in these newly emerged states. That would be 0.1% of the total population. Yeah. Very early settlement. Savannah was a very, yes, very early, large, probably one of the largest settlements. And also, New York was not the big center of Jewish life. It was an afterthought, right? And later on, it would be Cincinnati, not New York City. Cincinnati would be where the West was moving and where later the Reform would set its center. So what was life like for Jews in those early days? Here's a letter, 1790, from a woman by the name of Rebecca Samuel, writing back to her parents in Germany. I think it's Germany. Says, I hope my letter will ease your mind. You can be reassured and send me one of the family to Charleston, South Carolina. She's in Petersburg, Virginia, and she doesn't like it. This place, to which, with God's help, we will go after Passover, to Charleston, South Carolina. That's where the big Jewish settlement is. The whole reason why we're leaving this place is because of its lack of Yehudishkeit. Yehudishkeit. It's a Germanic Yiddish. Dear parents, by the way, in the South, when you mention a Jew, you talk about Yehudim from Mississippi. Dear parents, I know quite well you will not want me to bring up my children like Gentiles. Here they cannot be anything else. Jewishness is pushed aside here. They're here in Petersburg, Virginia, 10 or 12 Jews, not worthy of being called Jews. We have a shochet, right, who goes to market and buys treif, meat, and then brings it home. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the people worship without a single Sefer Torah. Not one of them wore the talit or the arba kanfot except Hyman and my Sammy's godfather. The latter is an old man of 60, man from Holland, been in America for 30 years already. 20 years he was in Charleston. He's been living here for 4 years. Does not want to remain here any longer. Will go with us to Charleston. In that place is a blessed community, 300 Jews. You can believe me, I crave to see a synagogue to which I can go. The way we live now is no life at all. We do not know what the Sabbath and the holidays are. On the Sabbath, all the Jewish shops are open. They do business on that day throughout the week. But ourselves, we do not allow it to open. With us, there's still some Sabbath. You must believe me that in our house, we'll live as Jewish as much as we can. As for the Gentiles, we have nothing to complain about them. No complaints, right? Open. For the sake of a livelihood, we do not have to leave here. Not for that. Nor do we have to leave because of debts. Ever since Hyman has grown up, he has not had it so good. You cannot know what a wonderful country this is for the common man. One can live here peacefully, right? The new America was the golden Medina, right? She's reflecting that. Wasn't called golden Medina until later, but it was this land of opportunity. All the people who hear that we are leaving give us their blessings. They say that it is sinful that such blessed children should be brought up here in Petersburg. My children cannot learn anything here, nothing Jewish. May your devoted daughter and servant, Rebecca, wife of Chaim, son of Samuel, the Levi. Okay, so Rebecca Samuel, written in Yiddish, 1790s, Petersburg, Virginia, a family in Hamburg. So as a side note, for several years, I served as rabbi in Newport News, which is about an hour away. As you go down the James River, before you cross the harbor to Norfolk. And it was not far from Jamestown, the famous Jamestown colony. It was right there, the first English settlement. And I took advanced courses at College of William Mary nearby, which was Colonial Williamsburg. And I dined several times at a famous fish restaurant at the bridge at Yorktown, which marks the site where the British surrendered in the last battle of the Revolutionary War. And our son was born in a hospital overlooking the harbor where the first battle of modern battleships was fought, Civil War. And one more piece of history in that whole part of Virginia would sink into the ocean with all the weight of history in that little section of Virginia. So going back though, Jews took an active part in the colonial period, the Revolutionary War, even though there were very few in number, as I say, 3,000 altogether. So for example, Francis Salvador, prominent Jewish family in London, came to the colonies because the family fortune was in trouble and built up farmlands in South Carolina, became a real pioneer type, leather stockings and all, and soon elected to the South Carolina Provisional Congress as a representative, was authorized to issue letters of credit to the new state. And a lot of Jews involved in finance, helping finance these new colonies. And he kept the government costs down, took part in drafting the state constitution, later died in battle with the Cherokee Indians who were fighting on the British side at that time. And at age 29, he was the first Jew to die in the war. It was by age 29, he had already achieved these things. Right? Today, at age 29, you're still in your parents' house. What can I tell you? Things shift. Mordechai Sheftel, then there's Mordechai Sheftel, chairman of the parochial committee of Christ Church Parish. That's not the name of a church, that's the county, not a church. Parish meaning a county. The de facto governor of that part of Georgia, Royal Governor James Wright, didn't like it. He said, one Sheftel, a Jew, is on the parochial committee. This fellow issues orders to captains of vessels to depart the king's port without landing any cargoes that have been legally imported. Doesn't like what Sheftel is doing. He took an active part in the revolutionary government of Georgia, was captured by the British, who labeled him a very great rebel. In jail, it's thought that he spoke Yiddish to the German soldiers and made friends with them. You know, the British hired Hessians to do the fighting for them, Germans. And if you speak a bit of Yiddish, you can get by with German also. So it said that he made friends with them. But the British soldiers didn't like him. They tormented him, forced him to eat pork. Said he escaped to Charleston from the prison in a boat and was captured again, this time imprisoned in Antigua and the Caribbean, later released. He loaned money for expeditions against the Indians and supplies for troops. He was owed $139,000. So I'm trying to do the calculation. They're calculators for inflation. $139,000, add 3 zeros to it. Not 3 zeros, and half of that, but there would be 60 million today, I think. Something like that. Got back 7,000. Right? It's not a good return on investment. So Shefter was also a religious Jew, later moved to Philadelphia. He helped build the synagogue Mikveh Israel and was also its president. And guess who also contributed to the synagogue then? Benjamin Franklin. Right? People were giving to each other's institutions. It was very interesting. Jews gave to Christian institutions, Christians gave to Jewish institutions. So this is that Mikveh Israel synagogue. But then no story of Jews in early America complete without Chaim Solomon. Okay, that is his picture. And so here's the background on him. He's probably the best known of the Jews of that period. Polish-born American businessman, interesting Polish-born. Most of the Jews coming were Sephardic, but you had a few coming from Germany and Poland at this time. Not many, but he was one of them. He was a principal, he's in the before the revolution, the rise of the revolution. Yeah. So that's where he's principal financier of the American Republic, and also he was one of the founders of the synagogue in Philadelphia. He came here in 1772. And the question, why did he come here in 1772? Because in Poland, he was involved in the movement of the Poles to fight against the German, Austrian, and Russian occupation of Poland. The Jews were, it was starting at that time. Jews were involved in defense of Poland, which Poles don't always recognize, but it was true. So he said, better get out of there quickly before the Russians, that's whether the Russians or the Germans, depends on which area he was in. So he fled to New York City, and he became a commissioned merchant. So he must have been okay when he came here to start quickly. In 1776, the British, who controlled New York City, arrested Solomon, and he was in prison. And this exposure in prison may have led to his early death. He was paroled and arrested again in 1778 on more serious charges, escaped, went to Philadelphia. There he established a brokerage house, acted without salary as financial agent of the French, doing all in his power to facilitate the Franco-American alliance. Among his many other contributions to the colonies, Solomon subscribed heavily to government loans, endorsed notes, gave generously to soldiers, equipped several military units with his own money. So the other man, famous financier of this period, Robert Morse, who was superintendent of finance from 1781 to 1784, appointed Solomon as broker to his office. And Morris records in his diary that between 1781 and 1784, Solomon lent more than $200,000, and by some reports, by the end, the government ended up owing him $600,000. And again, if you do the calculation, it is I think it's multiplied by 500. I think it would be 30 million, 40 million, something like that, or 100 million. Can't do the math right. 300 million, maybe that's it. The exact amount is unknown. At the time of his death, though, he was penniless, left penniless. So what we do have of him, though, is this statue. It's in Chicago. Beautiful statue, Washington in the middle, Roger Morris and Chaim Solomon. Oh, that's right. On Gardner, there's a statue there in honor of, that's right. That's right. And this is, so I think it's, it's Morris is on, Roger Morris is on the, on my left and Solomon on my right in the image. Well, what about the man? Here's another one. What about the man who helped shape the American Constitution and gave birth to a musical? Did the original Hamilton look like this? Or, you know who that is. Or did he maybe look like this? Why? Hamilton generally is considered a lifelong Christian. He died as a Christian, was buried as a Christian, but there's a suspicion that he may have been born and raised as a Jew. It's an argument that came out in a book by Professor Andrew Porvanker, Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton. And even if he wasn't fully Jewish, he was very Jewish in his birth, in his education. What do I mean by that? Here's a summary about, or an abstract of the book. He researched Hamilton's mother, who was born Rachel Fawcett, who had married a man named Johann Levine. Johann Levine, he was a Danish Jew. This is what we would see, and took his surname. It appears this surname Levine appears very common in many historical texts of that period. After the Levines had a son, it's not yet Hamilton, their marriage broke up. Rachel Levine later had two more sons, including Alexander, out of wedlock with a Scottish man named James Hamilton, hence Hamilton. And she enrolled Alexander in a Jewish school on Nevis, which had a significant Jewish population, but 1/4 of the free white population. To a Jewish school, Dafka Jewish. There are other schools, bigger schools. Why just a Jewish school? They asked this question. And so one explanation is that no other school would take the boy because his mother was questionable. The other explanation is no. It turns out, schools would take in children of illegitimate relationships. They did. The Christian schools had no problem because they saw an obligation. She picked out a Jewish school. So, the professor in the speculation suggests that perhaps when she was married to Levine, that he actually had her converted. Conversion, then there were no formal rabbis at that time. He found 3 Jews, took her to mikveh, and that's it. But technically, he would have been born a Jew, possibly. Okay, possibly, because she was Jewish. Sounds good, sounds good. So what is clear is that he got a very solid Jewish education in that school. And as he's a young man growing up, he's not particularly active within the Christian church, doesn't really seek out association with Christians. Only later, as he gets towards his last years, he starts to associate with the Christian church. But what's exceptional is that unlike many other people, he took on Jews as his clients, number one. He was one of the strongest defenders of the rights of Jews in the early American public, more than any of the founding fathers. Outspokenly defender of the Jews. So hence, this lends the sense that he was aware of the Jewish heritage, whether it is technically Jewish or by influence, but that was part of it. So, sounds good. Oh, so we'll get to that. Yeah. But what I was saying about Hamilton, of Washington, nobody said Washington had a Jewish origin, but of Hamilton, that's what makes it interesting. So, as I say, he stood out in his defense of Jews. So we now come back to the question, well, what about accepting Jews? So what did it take to guarantee our rights here? So we go back to our rights and really go back to South Carolina, 1869, the first colony to grant freedom of conscience to Jews, heathens, and dissenters. Heathens usually meant Muslims, primarily. That's what they had in mind. I don't think they had many, but they did it theoretically. And dissenters, that means people who are not part of the official Church of England. They may have been Baptists, they may have been Catholics. So Article 87, heathens, Jews, and other dissenters from the purity of the Christian religion may not be scared and kept at a distance from the knowledge of the truth, have an opportunity of acquiring themselves with the truth. Therefore, any 7 or more persons agreeing in any religion shall constitute a church or profession to which they shall give some name to distinguish it from others. In other words, we're going to allow people to settle who we don't agree with on matters of faith, because we believe that they'll see how nice we are and how good and true our faith is. They will become one of us. And hence the idea of open conscience. Because if I have a conscience of my own that I value, why should I lock somebody else out from it? Right? That's the premise of the idea of freedom. So 1669, right? It's not because anybody can believe anything they want. It's because I believe strongly in what I have, and I'm not afraid to expose you to it, and I'm not afraid of being exposed to it. Then Jefferson himself, we'll see what Jefferson thought about Jews next time, but he believed his great claim to fame was not the Declaration of Independence, but the Statute of Freedom of Religion in the state of Virginia, right? And that became the foundation for the clause in the First Amendment about the right of religions, freedom of religion. We, the General Assembly, no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place of ministry, nor be enforced, restrained, or burdened, or otherwise suffer on account of their religious opinion. All men be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions, matters of religion. They can profess their church or their synagogue, whatever it is, and they can make their claim in public without being oppressed, right? No one should in any wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capabilities. And that became then the basis for the Amendment 1788. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Soviet Union also had freedom of religion, but it did not proclaim the free exercise thereof, but it proclaimed the freedom to propagate atheism. There's a big difference there. So, but now we'll ask the question, but did it really mean Jews? We're sitting here. They say freedom of religion, but do you mean Jews? Do you really mean us? Maybe talking about Catholics, because Catholics also had a problem. And we're very wary of our standing. And so the head of the Jewish community, and that was, I think it was Sesas, and I think it was who sent this letter. It was the one in this pamphlet, Gershon Sesas. I think he's the one who authored the letter. So he sends the Washington letter. Permit the children of the stock of Abraham to approach you with most cordial affection and esteem for your person and merits, and join with our fellow citizens in welcoming you to Newport. Deprived as heretofore have been of the invaluable rights of free citizens, we now, with gratitude to the Almighty, behold a government erected by the majesty of the people, a government which gives to bigotry, gives no sanction, to persecution, no assistance. Notice in bold letters, because that will be picked up by George Washington, you'll see. But generously affording to all liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship, deeming everyone of whatever nation, tongue, or language equal parts of the great governmental machine. We desire to send up our thanks to the Ancient of Days, the great preserver of men. May graciously conduct you through all the difficulties and dangers of this mortal life. When, like Joshua, full of days and honor, you are gathered to your fathers, may you be admitted into the heavenly paradise, to partake of the water of life and the tree of immortality. Butter him up, butter him up. All right, so now the clincher is Washington's famous response. And as I say, he picked up on the phrasing. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as it was by the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. So toleration is what the Europeans began giving the Jews in this period. It was a tolerance patent, an edict of toleration, for example, in Egypt, in Austria. Huh? Yeah, so, okay. We'll let you sit here. Not going to be, not going to be any privilege. Just behave yourselves. That's toleration. But now he goes a different step. No, that's not enough. It's the exercise of their inherent natural rights, right? We're talking about inherent natural rights because that's the foundation of the United States. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, right? You see that phrase that he picked up, because only those who live under its protection shall demean themselves as good citizens, giving it on all occasions their effectual support. What we want is citizenship. That's what we want. It would be inconsistent with the frankness of my character not to avow that I'm pleased with your favorable opinion of my administration. It's very modest. People then were very modest. They wrote modestly. It's not like modern politicians. I'm the greatest. No, it would be inconsistent with the frankness of my character not to avow that I'm pleased. Right? Which means I like what you said. And fervent wishes for my felicity, my well-being. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants. Beautiful phrase. The children of the stock of Abraham continue to merit and enjoy goodwill of the other inhabitants. It's not just law, it's the goodwill of the community. Well, everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree. There should be none to make him afraid. Right? As a trained Christian, he knew the Bible very well. He could quote it back to us very well, better than we could. May the Father of all mercy scatter light and not darkness in our paths and make us all in our several vocations useful here in his own due time and way, everlastingly happy, George Washington. There you go. So, all right, that's the clincher for the new American Jewish community. Now, it's not an easy trip after that. It's a rocky road after that still. We'll talk about that rocky road as we take our place in American Jewish life and American. Yes, go ahead.
Washington's letter. Here is writing about the food village human time as equal as slaves.
Yeah, right. They're in a contradiction and they're aware of it. Yeah. What's up? It goes either way. All right. Yeah. So there's an inherent contradiction. Huh? Oh, the Adams? Yeah, James. Hamilton also, I think, was an abolitionist also. Did he have slaves? I think he was in favor of abolition. Yeah. Yeah. And so hence, yeah, Liberia was established with that thought in mind. Yeah. The question is, right. Yeah. Would it work with this, with the, yeah. Yeah.
People are not in America, same Europeans, all European descent, all of it people who are European universities, all this writing is of European descent, and they are more or less tolerant to Jews. So look at the fact of the problem, the philosophy of the place and time. So the same people in Europe are not. The people provoke even in low education that will make the bad deal or they allow people of other denominations to worship and to seek for the truth. So what you see here, that's the philosophy of place and time. People are the same.
Yeah. I think because the Americans started out also as people who they're people fleeing Europe for the failures of Europe to a great extent. And some of it is financial, looking for prosperity. Some of it is looking for freedom of opportunity, and some is looking for freedom of conscience. And I think that may have been what flavored the Americans. Now, on the question of the slavery, I mentioned Petersburg, Virginia. Turns out that Petersburg in Virginia had a large free black settlement, and it remained so for many, many years in through the Civil War. And they actually fought on the southern side, some of them. So we have this very odd situation where I don't think formal racism had not yet completely been cultivated. I think that formal racism comes in after the Civil War as a theory, or maybe just about the times, because in the years that as they're trying to give a justification for why they're enslaving somebody, and they're looking at like Darwin, the predecessors to Darwin, and trying to justify, right? Because they got to square away this thing of, well, we're supposed to be all equal. Maybe some are more equal than others, right? To borrow Animal Farm. Yeah.
That they do, they still put in this framework that they knew at some point in the future would evolve.
Yeah. So the potential for strife is built into the Constitution, because I mean, you get into this thing about why they do the 3/5 of a person. And the 3/5 of a person was so they would not count slaves as votes towards the Congress completely. They couldn't not count, because then the South would not agree to it and they would not have a country. So they come up with this compromise, which is very weird to us, of 3/5. So, okay, you got slaves, there are more slaves than there are free people, but we'll only give them a 3/5 count as far as going the delegations to Congress, so that you will not overpower the free states. Because had they counted the slave as a full person, those slave states would have overpowered the free states. And this enabled the leveling of power between the North and South. Then the next question comes in: what happens when we expand free states, slave states? Are these new territories going to be free or slave? And that's where we get these terrible wars going on between the territories, like bloody Kansas, as they're trying to fight for the grounds. Are you going to be free? Because if we can have more slave states, we can guarantee the continuity of the system that we depend on. If we have more free states, we can then guarantee the continuity of the system that we depend on. Hence, those are the groundworks that will eventually lead to a civil war. And it's like there's probably was no way out of it. There was other than bloody conflict, right? And it took another century after Civil War to fully address the issue of rights. Yeah. Okay. So with that, any other questions? Session is adjourned. Class is adjourned. Class dismissed. Okay. Economic was a large part. Yeah. Yeah. But what is interesting, yeah, is that the Americans, these early settlers, began to throw away their traditions. So that when the Europeans looked at the Americans, the famous German writer Goethe, and he looks at America and he says, America, you have it better. You don't have history behind you. You don't have the castles and all of this sitting on, you don't have it. So you are, like Shakespeare read, this brave new world that has such creatures in it. Shakespeare in his day are looking already at this, something, different things. Yeah, and the American ideal is the self-made man, very American image, starting from scratch, born again, and so that is one of the things that gave Americans the drive, yeah, and it enabled people to be absorbed in a way so that eventually Irish and Catholic, Italians and so on would be absorbed. Eventually, Arabs get absorbed into America, right? We have big settlements in the Midwest, mostly Lebanese Christians, so it's a little easier. but they're being absorbed. That's not happening in Europe. Nobody is being absorbed in Europe till today. Kosovo, the Albanians and the Serbs and the Albanians there are at it again. You can't stand each other, right? They're next door neighbors, almost the same languages. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's Albania, it's Kosovo's Albanians or yeah, historic, and that's it. So they're not going to give up. Yeah, yeah. Even the Belgians, they have trouble, I think, with each other. The Walloons and the Flemish, the British, the Scots don't want Britain anymore. Was on apportionment, gerrymandering. Yeah, yeah. And what is the correct way of, yeah. And that's gerrymandering is a game that the parties, both parties have been playing, but in Georgia's, in Alabama's case, was specifically race bound. What? No, well, no, that's for congressional. So I'm not sure how they're going to resolve it. I don't know how they resolve that. Yeah, I mean, you look at, yeah, but you look at that's a built-in problem because all of our districts are gerrymandered in some way. You go into the LA City Council and they're counting how many seats are Jewish seats in this district, how many are Spanish, how many of this and that, and move the border this way and this way and this way. Friend of mine wanted to get onto the state council that does the mapping for the Congress and just say, let's just have simple, clean grid lines. And you're in the grid line. Therefore, we have a fair mix of everybody, mixed interests. Some may be industrial, some may be commercial, some may be this ethnic, and do it that way. That's the only way to avoid it. Congress, yeah, that's right. But that way you get a guaranteed mix. Then you can density. You can adjust grid lines, for density. Yeah. So it's calculating population density, but it's cleaner lines. But then everybody has a vested interest. Yeah, everybody has vested interest. Yeah. So I don't think the thing is the Supreme Court doesn't give solutions. It never can give a solution. It can only say you can or can't. Well, it can tell you this is not correct. It cannot tell you do exactly how to do. Yeah, that's a long story. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I think it is North Dakota, Montana, or one of the northwest states. No, Wisconsin heavily populated. It's Montana, Wyoming, one of those things. Yeah. One congressional district and 2 senators. Yeah. Well, it's the structure. Yeah. All right. Yeah. The problem is to do it, you would need to have a constitutional convention. And once you do a constitutional convention, everything is, and so keep it as it is because don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. That's it. All right, everybody. Yeah. You don't know where it'll go. You may not be happy. The Europeans tried to do. Remember, the Europeans tried to put together a European constitution a few years ago, 10,000 pages, something like that, and it was roundly rejected because nobody could read through the 10,000 pages. That's what happened. There was only one paragraph of the Constitution was then 10,000 amendments, something. I don't know. Okay, everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.